He only stopped at the bar for a meal with his son, but within minutes, 3 aggressive cops cornered 2 silent women in the corner booth. The veteran's instincts kicked in, calm, precise, unstoppable. Only later did he realize the women weren't victims. They were undercover FBI agents, and by protecting them, he had just exposed the most dangerous corruption ring in the county. This is the true story of a man who never asked to be a hero, but became one simply by refusing to stay silent. The town of Millstone didn't get many strangers. It was the kind of place where folks still nodded to each other at gas stations and knew who baked the blueberry pie at the diner. So when a tall man with long, wind-blown hair and a faded green military jacket walked into Brewer's bar, just after dusk, every head turned, if only slightly. Luke Walker didn't return a single glance. His boots were caked with highway dust, his hands calloused from years under car hoods, and his eyes, those tired, steel-gray eyes, told the kind of story most people didn't dare ask about. Trailing quietly behind him was a boy no older than 12, wearing a red hoodie and mismatched sneakers. He carried a beat-up canvas backpack slung over one shoulder and paused only to scan the room. Not nervously, strategically, like someone trained to assess an environment in 3 seconds flat. They didn't come to talk, just to eat, rest, and move on. Luke chose the farthest booth in the corner, his back to the walleyes on the door, a habit that had never quite left him. Caleb slid in across from him, placing the backpack beside him like a fragile suitcase full of secrets. The bartender, a burly man with a mustache like a broom, raised an eyebrow. "You new in town?" Passing through, Luke replied without emotion. The bartender didn't push. He just nodded and turned to fill 2 glasses of water. Across the bar, 3 off-duty cops nursed their second round of whiskey. Rick Mason, the one with the toothpick always hanging off his lip like a sneer, elbowed his buddy and jerked his chin toward the 2 women at the end of the counter. "They're back," he muttered. "3rd night this week." The women were striking tall, athletic builds with matching cheekbones and confident postures that didn't belong in a dusty town like Millstone. One wore a leather jacket, the other a denim vest over tactical black. Twins, unmistakably. Kyle, the youngest officer of the bunch, chuckled. "Bet I can get the quiet one to talk tonight." Rick narrowed his eyes. "We tried polite last time. This time, maybe a little pressure." Caleb had caught every word. "Dad," he said, voice low but steady. "Those guys are about to make a mistake." Luke didn't look up. "Let it go. They're not normal victims." Luke finally met his son's gaze. Caleb wasn't dramatic. He wasn't even impulsive. When he said something, it meant he'd already calculated every angle. "They're holding their breath," Caleb added. "And the one on the left, she's scanning the room for exits." Luke sighed and turned slowly. That's when he saw it. The taller twin had shifted slightly, just enough for her leather jacket to slide off her shoulder. Beneath it, barely visible, a faint outline of a badge holster glinted under the dim bar light. Not a police badge. Something else. Something federal. Just then, Rick slapped the bar loudly, startling both women. Well, back again," he said with a smirk. "You ladies ever gonna tell us what brings you to our dusty little town?" The twin in leather said nothing. The other one raised an eyebrow. "Just a drink? That all right with you?" Officer Rick leaned in closer, breath thick with alcohol. "Not if you keep flashing fake badges like last time." The air tensed. Kyle reached for something beneath his jacket. The woman's hand dropped instinctively to her side. Then came the voice. Calm. Low. Razor sharp. "That's enough." The bar went silent. Luke stood slowly from his booth. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stepped between the officers and the women with the weight of a man who had already seen what most people couldn't imagine. Rick scowled. "Who the hell are you?" Luke didn't answer. Kyle's hand emerged from under his coat, clutching the grip of his service pistol. In one motion so fast it blurred, Luke moved. He grabbed Kyle's wrist, twisted it upward, disarming him before the kid's brain caught up. With a pivot of his foot and a calculated drop of weight, he sent Rick sprawling into a bar stool. Mark, the third cop, tried to draw his baton, but Caleb was faster. The boy had rolled a steel ball bearing across the floor, and it struck Mark's ankle at the exact moment he lunged forward. He fell flat on his face. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The only sound left was a bottle rolling across the floor and the sharp breath of 20 stunned witnesses. Luke turned back toward the twins. "You two all right?" he asked. They didn't answer. But the one in the denim vest reached into her pocket slowly, carefully, and laid a silver badge on the bar counter. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Gasps echoed through the room. Rick, still on the floor, spat blood and snarled. "That's fake. Impersonating federal officers is a felony. And you," he pointed at Luke, "you just assaulted law enforcement." The taller twin looked at him with something between pity and rage. "I suggest you shut up before you dig your own grave deeper." Rick stood wobbling and pulled out his phone. "We'll see what the sheriff thinks when he gets here." Luke's jaw tightened. The trap had sprung. Danielle, the more emotional of the two twins, stepped closer to Luke and said in a low voice, "You shouldn't have helped us." Luke didn't flinch. You needed it. Dominique, the more stoic one, looked him up and down. "You just made yourself a target." Caleb spoke from behind his father. "Then we aim better." The bar watched in stunned silence as the man, the boy, and the two mysterious twins stood together against a system they hadn't even fully understood yet. And outside, distant sirens began to scream. The sirens wailed louder now, closer, angrier. Inside Brewer's bar, the air hung like a charged wire ready to snap. Luke stood like a sentinel between the twin women and the 3 bruised officers. His breathing was steady. Calm. Too calm for someone who had just taken down armed men. It wasn't adrenaline, it was muscle memory. His hands no longer trembled after conflict. They simply returned to their natural position. Ready, relaxed, and unreadable. Caleb, standing behind his father, adjusted his hood and kept his eyes on Kyle, who was nursing his dislocated wrist, with a look of betrayal, like the laws of physics had betrayed him more than the man in front of him. Danielle, still holding her FBI badge on the bar, narrowed her eyes. "Backup's going to storm in blind," she said. "They'll see 3 cops down and a man with a military build standing over them." Luke didn't move. "Let them come." Dominique pulled her phone from her jacket and tapped the screen twice. "They won't ask questions. Mason's in deep with the sheriff." "This is a setup," I figured, Luke replied flatly. "You don't sound surprised," Danielle added, studying his posture. "I've seen this playbook before," he said. Different uniform. Same stink. Outside, gravel crackled under heavy tires. Flashing lights danced across the window blinds. Someone yelled over a bullhorn. A door slammed. And then boots. 12, maybe 15. Luke exhaled slowly like a diver preparing for a long descent. "Caleb," he said, without turning. "You remember the plan?" The boy nodded. "Stick to shadows. Watch everything. Intervene only if it gets stupid. That's my boy." Caleb stepped back into the dim hallway near the restrooms, melting into the shadows like smoke. No one even saw him go. The front door burst open. Sheriff Morton was the first through, large-bellied and red-faced, holding a shotgun as if it were part of his anatomy. Behind him came a squad of deputies, weapons drawn, eyes wide with the thrill of overreaction. "What the hell happened here?" Morton barked. Before Luke could speak, Rick staggered forward. "They attacked us." He broke Kyle's wrist and assaulted 3 officers, and these 2, he pointed to the twins. "They're pretending to be FBI." Morton turned to Luke. "You got 10 seconds to get on the ground before I put you there myself." Luke didn't blink. Asked to see the badge. They forged it, Rick shouted. It's fake. I know federal when I see it. Dominique stepped forward, lifting her FBI ID slowly with 2 fingers. Special Agent Dominique Hart, serial number 209 Bravo, Washington Field Office. You can call Assistant Director Ellison for verification. But I suggest you use a secure line. Morton ignored her. Cuff them all. Now. 2 deputies moved toward Luke. Then everything happened at once. Kyle, still reeling, pointed. He's dangerous. He disarmed me. Morton raised the shotgun. Luke's stance shifted barely noticeable. A fraction of a foot pivot. A subtle bend in his left knee. And then Kyle lunged again, his pride too wounded to sit still. Luke moved like water. He caught Kyle's elbow mid-strike, used the boy's momentum against him, and redirected it straight into the sheriff's chest. Morton stumbled back, his shotgun swinging upward. In the same breath, Luke ducked, caught the weapon with one hand, and twisted it sideways as it fired, sending the shell harmlessly into the wooden beam above the bar. The room exploded into chaos. Dominique swept Danielle behind her and took cover behind an overturned table. The deputies froze, unsure who to aim at anymore. Stand down, Danielle shouted. We're federal agents. Lies. Rick shouted back. They're all part of it. He's protecting them. Luke didn't speak. Instead, he placed the shotgun on the ground, slowly, and raised his hands. One message. No threat. No fear. I didn't come to fight, he said clearly. But I won't let corruption wear a badge and call itself justice. There was silence. And then the old bartender, who had been hiding behind the counter, stood up slowly and shouted. He saved those women. I saw it. The kid, too. One of the cleanest takedowns I've ever seen. And I served 2 tours in Fallujah. Morton's lips twitched. Dominique stood upright now, her badge raised high. You can detain us. But it'll be the last thing you do before this county gets buried under federal charges. Luke turned to her. They're not listening. This isn't about justice. It's about covering tracks. Rick, now holding his side and fuming, smiled wickedly. Doesn't matter. We'll book you anyway. Charge you with obstruction, impersonation, assault, you name it. That's if you can find a judge who isn't on your payroll, Danielle added coldly. Morton gestured toward Luke. Cuff him. 2 deputies finally approached, this time with more caution. Luke didn't resist. He extended his arms calmly, wrists forward. Do what you came to do. As the cold metal clicked shut around his wrists, Caleb watched from the shadows, eyes narrowed, hands gripping his small handheld device. From that angle, he had seen something the others hadn't, a thin black wire taped under the bar counter. And a red LED light blinking in a steady rhythm. A live audio loop. He tapped a command on his device and whispered, They rigged the bar. A deputy dragged Luke past the window. Morton shoved Dominique and Danielle toward a second vehicle. The bar emptied. And then silence returned, like a breath being held by the entire town. Inside, Caleb sat alone in the dark booth. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed faint blue. He whispered to himself, They messed with the wrong veteran and the wrong kid. Then he began to type. The cold steel of the handcuffs didn't bother Luke. He'd worn worse. Shackles in foreign camps, ropes soaked in blood, zip ties behind enemy lines. This was just theater. A performance for the benefit of corrupted men who wore law like a costume. The back of the police cruiser smelled like old, sweat synthetic leather and something that had once been coffee. Luke sat still, spine-straight, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the metal mesh between him and the 2 officers in front. Rick in the driver's seat, Kyle nursing his wrist in silence beside him. Hell of a mess you caused back there. Rick muttered, the toothpick twitching on his lip. Luke said nothing. You could have just kept your head down, old man. Rick continued. Could have finished your burger, walked out, and nobody would have remembered your face. Luke shifted slightly, just enough to lean toward the barrier. You don't forget the face of a man abusing power, he said, voice low. It stays with you, years later, in the mirror, in your sleep. Rick didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. The cruiser took a sharp right, cutting off the main road and heading down a stretch of cracked asphalt, flanked by dead fields and rusted fences. Luke frowned. This isn't the station. New holding site, Rick said. No paperwork. Rick smirked in the mirror. Paperwork comes later. Luke leaned back against the seat. So it was a ghost route. No logs, no booking. A place where people could disappear temporarily or permanently. They didn't know who he was. That was their first mistake. Back at Brewer's bar, Danielle and Dominique sat cuffed on a splintered bench behind the sheriff's office. The sisters looked nothing alike in that moment. Dominique was pure steel face, blank, breathing, even posture upright. The kind of woman who'd walked through fire and never flinched. Danielle, on the other hand, was shaking not out of fear, but fury. Her jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. She stared down at the cuff marks on her wrists, the red imprint of humiliation, betrayal, and something more personal. Their father had worn the badge, 27 years, clean record, shot in the line of duty, the same precinct where Rick Mason had once been a rookie under him. Danielle turned toward her sister. He planned this. Dominique nodded once. Since the day Dad died. Danielle looked up, voice trembling. You think he had something to do with it? Dominique didn't answer, but her silence was deafening. A door creaked open. Sheriff Morton stepped out, flanked by two silent deputies and a woman in civilian clothes, blonde, businesslike, with a pin that bore the insignia of the County Oversight Board. Morton gave a theatrical sigh. Ladies, I'd love to believe your story, I really would. But fake badges attacking officers resisting arrest. Dominique lifted her chin. We have clearance. Scan the chips in our IDs. Call Director Ellison. You have the means. You're choosing not to use them. The oversight woman, Ms. Landers, looked uncomfortable. I'll have to process this through the appropriate channels. Morton smiled like a man who knew exactly how slow appropriate channels could be. Danielle leaned forward, her eyes fire. You're delaying on purpose. Morton turned to one of his deputies. Put them in separate holding cells. Let them cool off while we verify their claims. You're not verifying anything, Dominique said coldly. You're stalling. Morton leaned in close, lowering his voice. You're out of your league, Agent Hart. This isn't D.C. This is my town, my rules, and no one's coming to save you. Danielle didn't blink. He's not just a mechanic, you know. Morton arched a brow. What? The man you cuffed, she said. Luke Walker. Marine Force Recon. Shadow Aero Division. You just put your hands on someone who used to take down warlords with a paperclip and a map. Morton blinked. The smile cracked. But it was too late. The trap had already been set. Caleb sat on the motel bed, fingers flying across his laptop. 3 screens open. One streaming the bar's security footage. One mapping out Rick Mason's call log pulled using a tactical algorithm he'd built 6 months ago to track political donations for fun. And one compiling encrypted voice messages from anonymous police sources, scrubbed for metadata, anonymized, recoded. He'd already decrypted the looped audio track Rick had hidden under the bar. It was a pre-recorded loop of bar chatter, laughs, clinks, music, and mundane conversation. The kind of background noise you'd use to mask illegal interrogation. But it had a flaw. The track repeated every 44 seconds. A good ear could catch the pattern. Caleb's ear was better than most. He uploaded the video to a dummy YouTube account, unlisted, encrypted, scheduled for auto-publish, if he didn't cancel within 24 hours. Then he turned on the microphone and spoke into the webcam. "My name is Caleb Walker. My father was taken by officers not on protocol. 2 women believed to be federal agents were also arrested. This is a full backup of the event. If I disappear, if anyone involved disappears, this video will go live." He paused, then added softly, "My dad didn't raise me to run." Inside the transport van, Luke closed his eyes and breathed through his nose. The ride was quiet now. Kyle had passed out, his wrist swollen like a grapefruit. Rick kept checking the rearview mirror, nervously tapping his fingers. Then Luke spoke, calm, flat, measured. "You're not the first to try this." Rick's grip tightened on the wheel. Luke opened his eyes slowly. "There were others before you. Thought they could bury the truth. Thought power made them untouchable." Rick didn't respond. Luke leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But the thing about ghosts, Mason, they always come back." Rick swallowed hard. The cruiser kept moving, but for the first time, the man behind the wheel wasn't sure he knew where it was going. The motel room was silent, but Caleb's mind was not. He sat cross-legged on the bed laptop, propped up on a worn suitcase, eyes bouncing between windows, faster than most adults could track. To the untrained eye, it was just a kid in a red hoodie tapping away on a computer. But behind that hoodie was a war map, one his father never had to draw for him. Caleb had learned early watch everything. The son of a Marine didn't grow up on lullabies and cartoons. He grew up with contingency plans, fire drills, encrypted chess boards, and lessons that sounded like riddles, but were survival guides. He didn't play Call of Duty. He studied real-world drone footage and learned to tell the difference between fear and strategy in a man's eyes. And now he was watching again. Caleb rewound the footage from the bar for the 5th time, slowing it frame by frame. The 3 off-duty cops had surrounded the Hart twins before the first confrontation. Nothing physical, just posturing. Predatory. Caleb tracked the positions of Rick, Kyle, and Mark in 3 separate windows, assigning color-coded overlays to their body language patterns. And there it was. He paused on a frame where Rick leaned on the counter, right hand under the lip of the bar, his pinky curled unnaturally inward. Gotcha. Caleb opened the local control schema for smart devices and accessed the building's audio system, a cheap Bluetooth-enabled amplifier connected to the jukebox. He isolated the loop. Every 44 seconds, the background buzz reset, laughter in the same pitch. A glass clinked at the exact same moment. Then a pause. Then ambient noise returned. A digital sleight of hand meant to disorient witnesses and mask abuse. His fingers danced across the keyboard. He tapped the microphone again. "If you're hearing this, it means the audio from Brewer's bar has been looped. This is artificial background, injected via a fixed interval device under the main bar counter, confirmed position beneath the leftmost tap. Suspicious contact officer Rick Mason, timestamp, 1843. He uploaded it to a secure Dropbox tied to a contact in D.C., a digital journalist who had once covered a scandal involving 3 missing whistleblowers in North Carolina. She owed Luke Walker a favor. Then Caleb reached into his bag and pulled out a second phone. Burner. Preloaded. He sent 1 text, "Exfil ready, Walker's compromised," and then another 2 FBI and hold. "Video incoming." He didn't need to know who'd respond. His father always said, "You don't need 100 friends, Caleb. You just need 2 who owe you their lives." Caleb leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. His dad had taught him to stay in the background, be the ghost behind the glass. But this wasn't just background anymore. It was war, quiet, modern, calculated war, and Luke Walker was no longer the only soldier in the family. Sheriff Morton was in his office sipping black coffee and reading a blank report. Rick hadn't filed anything yet, too busy scrubbing footage. Dominique and Danielle were in separate holding rooms, each guarded by a deputy Morton barely trusted. They hadn't cracked, hadn't even spoken since being thrown in. But the sheriff knew what was at stake. If even a sliver of their claims were true, his entire department would be audited. His own property dealings, his offshore accounts, the favors he'd called in gone. He stood up and walked to the interrogation wing. A chill settled into his chest, not from guilt, but from fear. Not of them. Of the silence, of what they weren't saying. He opened the slot in Danielle's door. She sat on the floor, eyes closed, breathing steady. "You don't look scared," he said. "I've been locked in worse," she replied. "You think someone's coming for you?" She opened her eyes. "No," she said. "I know someone is." In the next cell over, Dominique had unclipped a hidden pin from her hair so small it looked decorative. But it was tech. Specialized. A gift from a former tech ops liaison in the field. She pressed the pin against the heel of her boot and felt the vibration. Signal acquired. Dominique Hart, alive, in custody. Sheriff Morton, Millstone County. Local time at 23:07. Then she whispered, "I am not rogue. I am a survivor. And the man you arrested saved my life." She held the pin against the concrete wall. The vibration paused, then buzzed again twice. Confirmed. Transmission active. For the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed. 10 miles away, Luke sat in a dark garage, the so-called temporary holding, that wasn't on any map, GPS, or county ledger. Just 4 walls, 1 flickering light, and 2 armed deputies, pretending to play poker while guarding a war machine they didn't understand. Luke kept his head down, listening, footsteps, 3 sets, then a phone ringing. "Then, sir," said one of the guards, "the sheriff's calling. Wants an update." The other cursed under his breath. "Tell him we're playing babysitter to Rambo." Luke smiled faintly. His hands were still cuffed, but he didn't need them to break out. He needed timing. As one deputy opened the side door to step outside and take the call, Luke leaned forward slightly. Then something beeped. One of the lights flickered faster this time. One of the guards stood up. You hear that Luke closed his eyes. Caleb had activated the fallback beacon. It meant video uploaded. Network scanned. Plan B is live. Luke exhaled deeply. He looked up at the remaining guard and spoke in a calm, controlled tone. "You know what the problem with working for the wrong side is?" The guard hesitated. Luke leaned forward. "You never know when the tide turns. Until it drowns you." The room they put Luke in didn't even have a clock. No ticking hands, no digital glow. Just 4 concrete walls, a rusted bench, and a flickering bulb that swung from the ceiling like a tired ghost. The kind of room designed not just to hold a man, but to erase him. He sat still, the chill of the bench bleeding through his shirt, his wrists still cuffed behind his back. His breathing was slow even. In combat, time stretches like chewing gum. You learn not to fidget. You learn that silence is louder than threats. Footsteps approached, measured deliberate. The door opened. Rick Mason stepped in alone, closing it quietly behind him. No deputies, no protocol, just the smirk of a man who thought he'd already won. "Well," Rick drawled, pulling up a folding chair across from Luke. "This is a twist, huh?" A washed-up Marine walking into my bar trying to play cowboy. Luke didn't answer. Rick leaned forward, toothpick, wagging in rhythm with his words. "You don't know what you stepped into. This isn't Baghdad. This isn't Fallujah. This is my town. And in my town, people like you take the fall." Luke raised an eyebrow just slightly. "People like me. You think those 2 fake FBI girls are gonna save you? You think your little sidekick of a son is gonna expose a system that's been running this county for a decade?" Rick stood, voice rising. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. By morning, you'll be officially booked for assaulting 3 officers. The girls impersonating federal agents. A crime that carries 10 years minimum. Luke met his eyes calmly. "You done," Rick scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Luke said quietly, "you've talked too much for someone who thinks he's in control." Rick froze, then laughed. "You got nothing." "I've got something you don't," Luke replied. "A son with a spine and a skill set you can't spell." That one landed. Rick's smirk faded. Luke leaned back, wrists still cuffed. "By now he's got your wire loop decrypted, your call logs tracked, and your financials flagged. You're not just losing a cover-up, Rick. You're losing your kingdom." Rick's fist clenched, but something in his posture changed. Shoulders tightening, the first twitch of fear in his eyes. "You think the feds will listen to some brat with a laptop?" he snapped. "They'll listen to the evidence," Luke said. "They always do. Eventually." Rick stormed toward the door, knocking twice. It opened. He didn't look back. Luke closed his eyes and whispered into the room as if speaking to no one. "Stay sharp, son. I'm holding the line." Caleb stood in the parking lot behind the bar, shrouded in the darkness, between two dumpsters, holding a burner phone in one hand and a folded map in the other. He had tracked the cruiser. It wasn't hard. Old county vehicles still pinged GPS through a vulnerable satellite channel. Caleb had spoofed the signal using a back door he'd found in an open-source tracking software the year prior, purely out of curiosity. Tonight it paid off. He watched the dot slow down outside a garage 5 miles from any official detention center. "Not on the books," he whispered. "They're hiding him." He sent the coordinates to the anonymous journalist in D.C., adding a note, "Non-registered detention. Time sensitive." Then he pulled out a tiny device, no bigger than a USB stick, and slid it into the back of the bar's outdoor security panel. The light blinked once, twice, then green. System breach complete. Inside, the old bartender, his name was Walter, stood wiping glasses with a rag that had seen better days. He paused when the TV above the bar suddenly blinked and began playing a clip. The footage was silent, time-stamped, and raw. 3 cops, 2 women, a man in a green military jacket. 1 move, 1 message. Walter narrowed his eyes and nodded slowly. "You brave son of a gun." He reached for his phone. In a cramped apartment 20 miles away, Clara Jennings, an investigative reporter, long believed to have been pushed out by her former editor, picked up the call. She answered with 1 word: "Talk." Walter gave his name and said only this: "I just watched a veteran take down 3 dirty cops in under 6 seconds, and now he's in a hole nobody can find." Clara's fingers flew across her keyboard. Name: Luke Walker. Clara froze. The name hit her like an echo from the past. Her voice dropped. "You sure?" Walter paused. Tall, long hair, worn green jacket, quiet eyes. Walked in with a kid who didn't say much but saw everything. Clara stood. "I've been looking for that man for 5 years." Back in the holding wing, Dominique sat on the floor of her cell, fiddling with the heel of her boot. Inside, a micro sensor she had activated earlier buzzed once, then twice. Signal boost. Danielle in the cell next door knocked once on the wall. Just 1 beat. Their childhood code. Dominique knocked back twice slow. Danielle smiled faintly. They weren't broken yet. Then a deputy opened Danielle's door. "You, come with me." Danielle stood slowly, her voice steady. "Why, Sheriff wants a word." As she stepped out, she whispered just loud enough for the wall to hear, "Don't crack. Someone's watching." The deputy didn't notice, but Dominique did. She smiled. Someone was watching. Caleb sat on the motel bed again, laptop open, comms device in one ear. The second phone rang. He answered with a code word. "Snowfall." A woman's voice replied, "Echo Red." "I'm inbound." Caleb paused. "Clara?" I owe your father more than I can explain. I've got your files. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't do anything reckless. Caleb's voice was calm. Reckless is for people who don't have a plan. Then he whispered, as if his dad could hear him through the night air. Hold on, Dad. I lit the fire. The clip went live at 5:17 a.m. A 10-second silence preceded it. Then came the grainy footage, security camera angle, wide shot, time-stamped, and unedited. The bar. The confrontation. The moment Rick raised his hand. The calm disarm by a man in a worn military jacket. The sharp, perfect throw from a child, barely visible in the shadows. Then the badge. The silver glint of FBI credentials landing on the counter like a hammer of truth. The caption read, "Singledad veteran protects. 2 FBI agents from Dirty Cops, then gets arrested." Within 30 minutes, it had 10,000 views. By the hour, it had 120,000. By sunrise, John Protect Luke Walker was trending on X, TikTok, and Reddit. The internet didn't need much. Just one spark. Caleb had handed them gasoline. Clara Jennings stood in the center of her small home office, both hands trembling slightly, as she hit send on a package labeled Millstone Cover-Up. Bar footage, audio loop location coordinates. Live witness, the recipient. A private server tied to 2 watchdog groups and 1 trusted contact inside the bureau, the kind that didn't blink when the word rogue agent came across their desk. She hadn't slept, but her voice was steady as she called the national news desk. "This is Jennings. I'm back. And I have something that's about to blow the doors off Millstone County." At 6:15 a.m., a woman in a pressed navy blue suit sat at her desk in Washington, D.C., staring at 3 screens and a flashing alert. Assistant Director Lynn Ellison of the FBI didn't scare easily. She had seen ambushes on convoys, watched her own agents fall to cartel bullets, and sat across from senators who'd lie without blinking. But something about the phrase federal agents held without warrant badge, exposed on tape, made her stomach tighten. Then she saw the footage and stopped breathing. She recognized the woman in the video immediately. Dominique Hart, a top-tier agent, listed as inactive, cleared 2 major operations in Arizona and Georgia, assigned to internal corruption surveillance, and vanished from reports 3 months prior. And she was in handcuffs, held by local police, illegally. Ellison stood. "Get me Homeland. Get me DOJ. Get me the director. We have a situation." Meanwhile, back in Millstone, Rick Mason wasn't watching the news. He was too busy punching holes in a concrete wall with words and threats. "This is getting out of hand," he shouted into his burner phone. "We need the footage, wiped the cloud. The drive the kid," everything Morton's voice on the other end cracked under the pressure. "We don't know where the footage came from." "Don't give me that," Rick hissed. "You knew bringing in Luke Walker was a risk. The guy isn't just some drifter. He's Marine Force Recon. His kid is a damn codebreaker." Rick was sweating now, pacing the floor of his private office, unaware that Caleb had already mapped his burner phone's location 3 hours ago and sent it to 5 journalists. He turned to Kyle, who sat silently on the couch, wrist wrapped in gauze, eyes blank. "You all right, kid?" Kyle didn't look up. They didn't fight back. Rick paused. Kyle repeated softer this time. "The women. The man. The boy. None of them fought us first." Rick's jaw tightened. "We're too deep now." Kyle swallowed hard. Maybe they were. At 7:02 a.m., across the country, a female senator from Wisconsin, known for her stance on law enforcement reform, sat in her kitchen, sipping coffee when her phone buzzed. She clicked the video. Halfway through, she was already calling her chief of staff. "I want that sheriff's name, and someone get me Assistant Director Ellison. We're not sweeping this one under the rug." At that same moment, in a dusty motel room, Caleb Walker leaned back in his chair, watching the numbers tick up in real time. 328,000 views. $52,000 in shares. His phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "You just cracked national media. Hold tight." He looked down at his hands, small, still calloused from helping his dad work on engines. Not the hands of a hacker. Not the hands of a child who should be navigating political landmines. But he had to. Because they took his father. And he wasn't going to wait around for someone else to fix it. Caleb picked up the walkie unit he had programmed to intercept open law enforcement channels. Static buzzed. Then a voice. Command center activated. Full response en route to Millstone. Orders from D.C. Caleb allowed himself a breath, not a full one. Just enough to know someone was listening. Dominique sat on the cell bench, cross-legged, perfectly composed. Danielle had been taken out for questioning an hour ago and hadn't returned. The lock on her cell buzzed. She stood. A deputy appeared. This one looked nervous. Palms sweating. Collar too tight. "Ma'am," he said. "Not agent, but not inmate either." She stared at him. "There's, a federal order just came through. You're being released. Temporarily." Her head tilted. "And my sister." He swallowed. "Coming too." Dominique stepped forward. "Tell your sheriff to start writing his resignation letter." His clock's ticking. At 7:34 a.m., in a secure hallway, beneath an unlisted building outside Millstone, Luke Walker was still handcuffed to a bench, still calm. He heard boots first. Then a voice that cut through the tension like a blade. "Mr. Walker?" He looked up. A woman in a navy blue FBI jacket stepped through the steel door flanked by two black-suited agents. "I'm Assistant Director Ellison." Luke nodded slightly. "Took you long enough." She gave a half smile. "The internet is faster than most choppers these days." She walked forward and unlocked his cuffs herself. "We owe you an apology," she said. "And a debt." Luke rubbed his wrists. "Forget the apology. Help me find my son." She smiled gently. "We already have." The holding room was empty now, save for the man sitting silently on the edge of the bench, hands free, eyes distant, posture still. Luke Walker hadn't said much since Assistant Director Ellison had uncuffed him. He hadn't asked for thanks. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded justice. He just waited like a soldier told to hold position until the dust settled. "You're remarkably calm," Ellison said, sitting across from him now with a file in her hands. "Most men in your shoes would be screaming for lawsuits, cameras, interviews." Luke gave the faintest shrug. "I didn't do it for the noise." She studied him for a long moment, then opened the file. Luke Walker. Marine Force Recon. Stationed overseas 6 times. Classified operations. Commendation for valor. Discharged with honor after injuries sustained during Blackstream. Then, nothing. Disappeared from record. Luke's jaw ticked. "I buried the uniform when I buried my wife." "That chapter's closed. Until tonight," she said. He looked up, then eyes sharp. "Until someone tried to bury justice right in front of my son." Ellison nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She slid a small object across the table, leather folded worn at the edges. A single Marine Corps dress glove, dark tan creased with time, and at the wrist, in faint silver stitching, Semper Fi. SR. Luke inhaled. His fingers hovered over the glove for a moment before he picked it up like it was something sacred. "Saw the footage," Ellison said softly. "An old friend of yours sent that. Said if anyone would know what to do when the system turns on itself, it was you." Luke ran his thumb along the faded thread. "Sam. General Sam Rourke," she confirmed. "Retired last year. Still watches over a few ghosts, though. Said he owed you more than just a handshake." Luke gave a rare, quiet smile. "He owes me a beer." Ellison leaned forward. "He told me you once pulled 6 men out of a burning convoy under sniper fire. Didn't even mention it in the after-action report." "It wasn't about me." "Still isn't, is it?" Luke didn't respond, so she changed the subject. We've taken over Millstone jurisdiction. Sheriff Morton is being relieved of command. Rick Mason's been suspended pending federal indictment. We have the looped audio file, the footage, the badge scans. It's airtight." Luke's voice was quiet but firm. "And the girls? They're safe. Agent Hart and her sister are being debriefed now. They're going to testify. And your son," she paused, almost smiling. "Maybe the only civilian minor to ever launch a federal investigation with one video upload." Luke's shoulders dropped an inch. "He okay?" he asked, voice suddenly heavier. She nodded. "He's waiting outside. Wouldn't leave until he saw you." Luke stood up, straightened his back. The old stiffness in his right knee ached, but he ignored it. He folded the glove and slid it into his jacket pocket over his heart. "Let's go." The hallway beyond the steel door was quiet. Luke stepped through with measured, calm eyes adjusting to the light. And there, seated on a bench between two vending machines, was Caleb. Hood up. Knees pulled up. Laptop bag clutched tightly in his hands like a security blanket. The moment their eyes met, the boy stood. But he didn't run. He just looked at his father. Really looked like he was trying to memorize the shape of him, to confirm he was real and solid and safe. Luke reached him in 2 strides. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Luke pulled him into a quiet embrace, one hand at the back of the boy's neck, the other resting over his spine. "You okay, Caleb?" finally asked, voice muffled. "I am. Now?" Luke said. Caleb pulled back, blinking fast. "You saw the video?" Luke nodded. "And the glove?" the boy asked softly. Luke smiled. "I saw that too." Caleb looked down. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let them erase you." Luke crouched down to eye-level hands on his son's shoulders. "You didn't just protect me, son. You protected truth. That's bigger than any war I ever fought." Caleb swallowed hard. "They're saying I broke 5 cyber laws." Ellison stepped in from the hallway. "We're going to call it an act of civic intervention. Your father's actions were tactical. Yours were tactical and digital." Caleb blinked. "That's a compliment, right?" Luke laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Outside the federal building, a black SUV waited. Inside were Dominique and Danielle Hart, freshly released faces, pale but defiant. When Luke and Caleb stepped into the daylight, Danielle rolled down her window. "You still think we're trouble?" she asked with a crooked smile. Luke gave her a look. "I never said you were the problem. I said your silence was." Dominique leaned forward. "Well, we're done being silent." A pause passed between them. Then she added more quietly, "We owe you." "You owe the people who haven't been heard yet," Luke replied. "Make it count." Danielle leaned across her sister and added, "If you ever need backup, you've got 2 more shadows on your side." Caleb grinned from behind his dad. "Technically 3, he added. Danielle laughed. Dominique just nodded once respectfully before the SUV rolled away. As dusk settled over Millstone, Luke sat on the back bumper of the FBI transport vehicle, watching the orange sky bleed into deep blue. Ellison stepped beside him, sipping from a paper coffee cup. "You going back into hiding?" she asked. Luke shook his head. "Not hiding. Just living quiet." She smiled. "Well, if you ever want a badge again, or a consulting gig, I'll keep a chair open." He looked at her with a half smirk. "I prefer a wrench to a gun these days." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out the glove, held it gently. "Still," he added, "it's good to know someone remembers." Ellison nodded, understanding the weight of legacy, and the burden of men who carry more truth than they speak. Dominique Hart sat in a gray government-issued office staring at the blank screen of a secure interrogation terminal. The room was cold, sterile, the kind of space where emotions weren't welcome, and truths were dissected like evidence on a slab. Across from her sat two bureau analysts, both men, both clean-shaven, both afraid to look her in the eye for too long. "We need a statement," one of them said, adjusting his tie. "We need to know how deep this goes," said the other, "and whether you and your sister are acting under rogue influence." Dominique said nothing. She'd given them everything they needed: her badge, her credentials, her case files. She'd even handed over encrypted communications from 3 months' worth of field operations, tracing corruption embedded within law enforcement networks. But it wasn't enough. Not for a system that feared being exposed. "You've been off-grid too long," one analyst added. "You violated several protocol chains." "Including I violated nothing," Dominique interrupted, her voice sharp and clear. "I followed the mission." The room went still. Then she stood. "No more delays," she said. "I want to speak." The men exchanged glances. "This is not, I want to speak publicly. That's not protocol." Dominique leaned across the table. "Protocol let my partner die. Protocol buried the evidence. And protocol would have let Sheriff Morton disappear me and my sister, if not for that man and his son." Her eyes were blazing now. The calm mask had cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "If you won't let me speak," she said, "then I'll speak without you." She turned and walked out before they could stop her. 10 minutes later, in a hallway, lined with LED lights and silent agents, Dominique met eyes with Danielle. Her sister's face was bruised but defiant. "They tried to pin operational misdirection on me," Danielle said. "Said I acted under emotion." "You did," Dominique replied. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "And it saved our lives," her sister added. They stood still for a beat. Then Danielle said, "You're really going to do it?" Dominique nodded. "No more hiding." Danielle didn't hesitate. "Then, I'm doing it with you." Clara Jennings was waiting outside the federal building when the twins stepped out, flanked by 2 junior agents who had no authority to stop them. "Ready?" Clara asked. Dominique held up a small device no larger than a lipstick tube. "Is this thing still linked?" Clara nodded. "Live uplink. Stream goes straight to 7 mirror platforms and a secure whistleblower server." Danielle glanced at her sister. "Say it clear." Dominique took a deep breath, then clicked the device on. She stepped forward into the sunlight, into the waiting world. "My name is Dominique Hart. I am a federal agent with the FBI badge number 7229 Bravo. I am speaking today without clearance, without protocol, and without the protection of a system that failed me." Clara's camera trembled slightly, not from movement, but from the sheer weight of the words. 3 months ago, my partner and I began investigating a network of corrupt law enforcement officials operating across multiple counties. We were given a list. That list included Sheriff Morton Officer Rick Mason and other names I can't release yet. She looked directly into the lens. We were told to stand down, told the investigation had been compromised. When we refused to drop it, my partner was killed. The official story says he died in an accident. That's a lie. Danielle stepped forward, voice clear and steady. They came for us. They hunted us. So we ran, not to escape justice, but to survive long enough to expose it. Dominique continued. And when they found us, when they finally trapped us in a bar in Millstone, it wasn't a federal response team that saved our lives. It was a mechanic, a single dad, a Marine veteran, and his son. Danielle added softly, "We would be dead without Luke and Caleb Walker." Dominique held up her badge now. This badge was never meant to be a shield for criminals. It was meant to protect people. It's time it did again. Then she ended the stream. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Across the country, millions watched the feed. News anchors scrambled to adjust programming. Talk shows replayed the clip within the hour. Senatorial aides began printing transcripts before the live broadcast had even ended. At FBI headquarters, Assistant Director Ellison stood in her office, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. A junior officer stepped in, nervous. "Ma'am, they've broken protocol." Ellison didn't move. "No," she said. They broke silence. The officer hesitated. "Should we discipline them?" Ellison turned her gaze slowly toward him. "Find the rest of the files, and call in the OPR. It's time we clean house." That evening back at the motel, Caleb sat with his father outside on the curb, watching the golden glow of sunset settle over the parking lot. He refreshed his phone again. 6 million views, he said. Dominique's speech is being translated into Spanish, Korean, Russian, even Braille. Luke nodded. "Good. She said your name, Dad." On air. "I heard. You're kind of famous now." Luke chuckled dryly. "I've had enough of fame to last a lifetime." Caleb leaned into his father's shoulder. "You're gonna be okay, right?" Luke looked at him. "Why would you ask that?" Caleb hesitated. "Because sometimes, even after the fight is over, the weight stays." Luke didn't answer right away. Then he placed a hand over Caleb's and said, "That's why we carry it together." For the first time, Caleb nodded, not as a boy seeking approval, but as an equal walking beside the man who raised him. Caleb Walker didn't look like a threat. At 12 years old, he stood just under 5 feet tall, wore an oversized hoodie, and still had freckles dusting his cheeks from the Arizona sun. But across 3 different government servers, 1 federal, 1 civilian, and 1 belonging to a major news network. There was a silent acknowledgement growing among cyber analysts and crisis managers alike. This boy is dangerous, not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he revealed. In the corner of a borrowed conference room inside the temporary FBI response center, Caleb sat cross-legged in a swivel chair, 3 laptops open in front of him, a folded paper map taped to the wall behind him, with red strings stretching from one tack to another. An agent in his 30s approached, cautiously holding a coffee he hoped would serve as a peace offering. "You're the kid," he said. "I'm Caleb," the boy replied, without looking up. "If you're going to condescend, try decaf." The agent blinked, then laughed despite himself, and offered the drink. "You're coordinating with the Bureau's internal affairs right now. Thought I'd see if you needed anything." Caleb finally turned. His eyes were too sharp for someone so young. "I need full access to municipal service records from Millstone County," he said. "Water, power, communications, anything tied to the sheriff's office, especially if it's buried under a civilian subcontractor name." The agent hesitated. "That could take hours to get clearance." "It'll take 12 minutes, Caleb replied. "I've already drafted the FOIA request and sent it through Clara Jennings's press badge. You're just here for the coffee." The man gave a half laugh and backed away. Caleb turned back to the screen. He was building something bigger than evidence now. He was building a map of power, a layered, color-coded web of corruption that didn't just outline crimes. It predicted them. Red lines traced confirmed connections. Rick Mason's offshore bank transactions, his private meetings with real estate developers, campaign contributions to Sheriff Morton's 3rd re-election run. Blue lines linked falsified reports across 5 townships, buried cases, disappeared evidence, and sealed juvenile records that matched a disturbing pattern. And gold lines, the ones Caleb had only just started charting, were drawn from victims. Whistleblowers. Good cops who'd quietly transferred out. One of them had been his mother's old friend, an honest patrolwoman who disappeared after testifying against her superior. "Everything's connected," Caleb whispered. Behind him, the door creaked open. Luke stepped in, holding 2 sandwiches and a bottle of water. He looked at the wall for a long time, taking in the chaos and the logic beneath it. "This what you've been building all night?" Caleb nodded, eyes still on the screen. Luke set the food down. "You sleeping at all?" Caleb shrugged. "I'll sleep when they're safe." Luke watched him in silence. There was pride in his eyes. And something else, grief maybe, or awe. a sense that his son had crossed some invisible threshold no parent wants to see come too soon. "You know, Luke said when you were 5 you built a fort out of old car bumpers and fishing wire. Called it your fortress of reason." Caleb smiled faintly. "Didn't hold up in a thunderstorm." "No," Luke chuckled. "But you stayed in it all night," said a good soldier doesn't abandon his post. Caleb turned, then really turned, and looked at his father. "I'm not a soldier, Dad." "No," Luke said softly. "You're something better." He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You're a builder." Across town, a retired journalist sat in a small podcast studio, clutching a packet of files sent anonymously 2 hours ago. His voice trembled as he read them on air. "I have before me a map compiled by a 12-year-old child revealing systemic abuse of power stretching across 6 counties. It contains verified documentation, cross-referenced incidents, and AI-mapped patterns that suggest a coordinated effort to suppress investigations, silence agents, and funnel resources into private hands." He paused, then added, "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is data. And it comes from a boy named Caleb Walker." Within minutes, calls flooded the local FBI field office. Within hours, agents were deployed to the 5 outer counties. By sundown, federal oversight officers had descended on 3 separate sheriff's departments, with sealed warrants in hand. And it all began with a single map. Danielle Hart leaned against the frame of the conference room arms, crossed, watching Caleb at work. Dominique stood beside her, her expression unreadable. "Reminds you of someone?" Danielle asked. Dominique nodded. "He doesn't hesitate." Danielle added, "You think the Bureau will protect him?" "No," Dominique said quietly. "But I think the truth will." Luke looked over his shoulder. "He's not doing this for protection. He's doing it for closure." Danielle frowned. "Closure." Luke exhaled. He lost his mom in a system that wouldn't listen. Now he's making sure the system has to. That night, as the last connection line was drawn, and the final report auto-synced to 5 federal inboxes, Caleb stood in front of the map he had built half paper, half code, and did something he rarely did. He sat still, not thinking, not planning, just being. Luke walked in and took the seat beside him, silent for a long while. Then Caleb whispered, "I think I understand now." Understand what Luke asked. What it means to fight without a weapon. Luke placed a hand over his son's. "You built one anyway," he said. "Just made of truth." And together, they sat there, father and son, under the quiet glow of justice, finally waking up. The doors of the Millstone County Jail opened just after 9:09 a.m., not with a crash, not with sirens, but with the cold efficiency of federal procedure. A convoy of unmarked black SUVs pulled into the lot. No sirens, no fanfare. Just tinted windows, armored tires, and the unmistakable weight of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Sheriff Morton stood in the lobby, sweat gathering at his temples, despite the air conditioning. He tugged at his collar as 4 FBI agents stepped inside, each one carrying more command than his entire department combined. The man in front didn't offer a greeting. "Sheriff Morton," he said flatly, holding up a sealed folder by order of federal mandate. "Your department is under immediate suspension. You are no longer in command of this facility." Morton blinked. "What the hell?" The agent continued unbothered. "You are being investigated for obstruction of justice, unlawful detainment, conspiracy to falsify evidence, and collusion with known corrupt officials in at least 3 counties. Another agent moved past him toward the hallway without a word. Morton sputtered. This isn't protocol. I want my lawyer." The lead agent didn't flinch. He's already been notified, along with the press. And with that, they walked past him. Not a word wasted, not a step out of place. And that's when the people began to gather. Outside, a small crowd had formed at the edge of the station lawn. Townsfolk, bar regulars, curious passers-by. Then someone stepped forward. It was Walter, the bartender, still wearing his apron. He held a phone in his hand, live streaming his voice, low but firm. "They're here because a man stood up for 2 women when no one else did," he said to the camera. "And now the truth's walking through the front door while the lies pack their bags." Someone beside him, a young woman in a denim jacket, added, "We saw the badge. We saw what they tried to do." Then more joined. An old veteran with a cane, a schoolteacher who recognized the Walker boy from his last enrollment years ago. A teenage girl who had once been pulled over by Officer Kyle and felt something off she couldn't explain. They weren't screaming. They weren't waving signs. They were just present, and for the first time, no longer silent. Inside the station, the agents moved fast. One entered a back room where Luke had once sat, cuffed and alone. Another opened a door to the cell block and removed the keys from a deputy who didn't argue. And then, at precisely 9:11 a.m., the door at the end of the hallway opened. Luke Walker stepped through. No cuffs, no guards, no fanfare. Just the quiet footsteps of a man walking free because the truth had finally caught up. Caleb was waiting just outside the front entrance, standing still as the world shifted around him. He didn't run to his father. He just stood there, hands in his hoodie pockets, chin up. Luke walked straight toward him, and when they met, Luke did something no one expected. He saluted, a full, formal, sharp Marine Corps salute. Caleb stared at him for a moment, then returned it. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud or raucous, but reverent. Like a breath the town had been holding finally released. In Washington, the broadcast was cut into national coverage within the hour. Anchors described it as a rare public exoneration and the beginning of an internal reckoning within multiple agencies. Senator Marlene Ford stood at a press podium by noon. "I have reviewed the files provided by Caleb Walker," she said. "I have spoken directly to Assistant Director Ellison and to both agents Hart. And I say this clearly, the days of protecting the powerful at the expense of the honorable are over." Behind her stood 4 mothers of victims who had filed complaints in the past, complaints that were buried sealed or quietly erased. And now, finally, they were being heard. Back in Millstone, Dominique and Danielle Hart stood beside Luke and Caleb outside the sheriff's office. A camera crew hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach. Dominique shook her head. "We're not giving statements." Danielle smiled. "We've said enough. Let the truth do the rest." Luke nodded, then turned to the small crowd still gathered. He stepped forward not to speak, but simply to stand among them. Someone placed a hand on his shoulder, an old woman in a church sweater. She said nothing, just gave a single nod, her eyes full of tears. Then a man stepped out of the crowd, former deputy, judging by the badge in his coat pocket. He cleared his throat. "You don't know me, sir, but I once worked under Sheriff Morton. I didn't know how bad it was, but I didn't ask either." Luke turned to him. The man looked down. "I should have said something." Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said gently, "You're saying it now." That evening in the small bar once known simply as Brewer's, a new sign was nailed into place by the front window. The Walker's oath below. It etched into wood, where silence ended and truth spoke first. Inside, the tables were full. Locals gathered. Veterans nodded at each other across booths. Tourists wandered in, curious about the bar from the video. Dominique poured coffee behind the bar now, while Danielle wiped down the counter with a smile. Caleb sat in the corner, working on a simplified version of his war map, turning it into a visual guide for civic youth groups, schools, and local precincts. Luke sat beside him, sipping sweet tea. "You ready for what comes next?" Caleb asked quietly. Luke smiled. I was never afraid of what comes next. Just wanted to make sure you had the tools to face it." Caleb nodded, and for the first time in his young life he whispered, not as a child, but as a man. "Then we're ready." The invitations came in waves: news networks, morning shows, podcasts, documentaries. Some wanted the drama Marine veteran versus corrupt cops. Others wanted the human interest angle single dad and genius son save the day. One offered a book deal. Another offered to fly them first class to New York for a televised town hall. Luke Walker declined them all, not with bitterness, but with quiet finality. "I didn't do it for applause," he told one persistent producer over the phone. "I did it because I was there, and it was right." Then he hung up, and never answered another call like it again. 3 days after the public federal announcement, the FBI offered a formal commendation to Luke and Caleb, a private ceremony if they wished it. Luke nearly said no, but it was Caleb who paused, looked at his father, and said, "Maybe it's not about us." Luke waited. Caleb continued, "Maybe it's about the people watching, people like the ones who don't speak up. Maybe they need to see that it's okay to stand." Luke nodded, so he agreed, but under one condition: no press, no cameras, no applause. The ceremony was held in a modest conference room in a federal building just outside Phoenix. No flag-draped stage, no music, just a simple circle of chairs and a table holding 3 black velvet boxes. Assistant Director Ellison presided. Dominique and Danielle Hart stood on one side, Caleb on the other. Luke stood still in the center, hands at his sides, head slightly bowed, not from submission, but from the weight of memory. Ellison opened the first box. "Luke Walker," she said, voice clear but solemn. "You are hereby awarded the Civilian Valor Recognition from the Department of Justice for unwavering bravery, the protection of federal agents under duress, and the defense of justice without authority or expectation." She handed the small medal to him. Luke took it, gently stared at it for a long moment, then quietly placed it back in the box. "Thank you," he said. Nothing more. No speech. No demand for recognition. Just a man acknowledging the moment, then letting it pass. Later, as the group sat in quiet conversation, Danielle asked Caleb, "What are you going to do with all your data now? The map, the records?" Caleb tilted his head. "Keep improving it. Turn it into something schools can use. A way for people to see patterns early before things rot." Luke looked at him, proud but reserved. "That sounds like a lot for someone your age," Danielle said. Caleb smiled faintly. "So was this," Dominique added gently. "You've got allies now. You're not alone anymore." Caleb glanced at his dad, then back to her. "We never were." That evening, as the Arizona sun began to dip behind the horizon, Luke and Caleb stood outside the motel room they'd called home for the past week. Their bags were packed, the truck was loaded, and the road ahead was long. Luke leaned on the truck bed and looked at his son. "You sure about this?" Caleb nodded. "We said we'd finish the rebuild back home. The shop still needs a new roof." Luke smiled. "And your school?" Caleb grinned. "They owe me 6 missed math tests. I figured I'd make them all extra credit." Luke laughed, then paused. "You really okay, kiddo?" Caleb looked at him, really looked, and said, "I think so." Then quieter, "You were scared, weren't you? That I'd lose something through all this?" Luke hesitated. "Yes," he admitted. "I was scared you'd lose your trust. In people, in systems, in what's worth fighting for." Caleb nodded slowly. "I didn't lose it," he said. "I just learned where not to put it." That landed deep in Luke's chest. But before he could say anything, Caleb added, "And I learned where to put it instead." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded paper. It was the original version of his war map, crude, smudged, hand-drawn, but still intact. He handed it to his father. "You keep this," he said. "Remind you that you raised a kid who could see the storm coming." Luke took it carefully, reverently, and tucked it into his jacket pocket next to the old Marine glove. No applause, no headlines, just the passing of legacy from father to son. Before they left, Luke made one quiet stop. He walked into Brewer's, now renamed the Walker's Oath, just as the sun cast golden light through the windows. Walter, the bartender, stood polishing glasses, nodding as Luke approached. "You didn't think we'd really change the name, did you?" Walter asked with a smile. Luke chuckled. "I thought you were bluffing." Walter shook his head. "Nah, the name's not just about you. It's about the idea of you, about what happens when regular people stop waiting for heroes and become them." Luke looked around at the quiet bar, the refinished wood, the photographs on the wall of veterans, whistleblowers, teachers, and community leaders. He nodded once and left without another word. Because real heroes don't shout. They just show up and walk away when the job is done. The new sign was carved by hand. No corporate branding, no backlit neon. Just smooth cedar wood etched carefully by a retired carpenter from 2 towns over, who drove in with nothing but his tools and a quiet story about how his daughter had once been silenced by a corrupt deputy, and how watching Luke Walker on that grainy bar video made him cry for the first time in a decade. The letters were simple and solemn, the Walker's oath beneath it in smaller text. In this place, silence broke and truth began. It was a Thursday afternoon when the sign was officially mounted above the bar entrance. No ceremony, no speeches, just townsfolk standing shoulder to shoulder as the last bolt was tightened. Inside, the air felt different now. The walls were repainted, the lighting warmer. Old photos of liquor promos and sports memorabilia had been replaced with framed newspaper clippings, handwritten letters, and printed screenshots of supportive online comments from strangers across the country. In the center of the wall behind the bar was the image that now defined the soul of the place, a still frame from the bar security footage. Luke, arm outstretched, shielding the Hart twins. Caleb half-shadowed behind him, steel ball still midair from his tactical throw. And on the countertop, the glint of the FBI badge that started it all. Walter, the bartender, stood behind the counter, polishing a row of glasses. But they weren't for beer. Not today. Today they held iced tea lemonade and locally brewed coffee. Because today wasn't about drinking. Today was about remembering. Dominique and Danielle Hart arrived quietly just before noon. They wore civilian clothes, denim jackets, hair down, no makeup, no service weapons, just themselves. The crowd made way for them as they walked toward the bar. Walter nodded to them. "You're right on time." Dominique smiled faintly. "We're not much for speeches." "Good," he replied. "This place has heard too many lies shouted into the walls. It's time for quieter truths." Danielle looked around, taking in the new energy of the space. "Feels like a sanctuary." "That's what we're building," Walter said. One story at a time. Behind the bar, pinned to a corkboard now filled with anonymous testimonies, was a handwritten note that had come in the mail the day before. It read, "I was going to quit the force. Then I saw what Luke did. Now I'm staying. But I'm staying to fight for what's right." Officer M below that. "My sister was assaulted by someone in uniform. No one believed her. This bar makes me believe again." Anonymous, age 17. The Hart twins stood silently reading each note. Danielle blinked hard. Dominique gently touched the edge of the corkboard, as if grounding herself in the voices that had once been silent and now were speaking. At exactly 12:30 p.m., Luke and Caleb arrived. They parked the truck a block away like they always did. No need for attention. No need for ceremony. Luke stepped into the bar wearing the same green military jacket now repaired at the seams. Caleb followed beside him, red hoodie pushed back, laptop slung across his shoulder like a tool belt. As they entered, the crowd went still, not in fear, not in awe, but in respect. It was Walter who broke the silence. "Right on time, gentlemen." Luke smiled faintly. "You open?" For truth, Walter grinned. Always. Caleb walked straight to the corkboard and added something of his own, a QR code printed on a slip of paper. He pinned it carefully at the bottom corner. Danielle walked over. "What's that?" "It links to a free toolkit," Caleb explained. "Guides for reporting abuse, whistleblower protections, anonymous digital reporting apps. I made it for students, teachers, nurses, anyone who's afraid." Dominique looked at him. "That's impressive." Caleb shrugged. "It's just code." Luke placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's more than that. It's courage wrapped in logic." Someone in the back clapped once, then another joined, then the whole bar filled with soft applause. Not loud, not for show, just honest, like rain after a fire. Later that evening, the bar was full. Not of drinkers, but of listeners. Veterans shared stories they had never told before. A young woman read a poem about reclaiming her voice. An off-duty officer face, still raw with shame, stood and apologized for looking the other way, then offered to run a youth mentorship program at the bar on weekends. Dominique and Danielle agreed to speak at the local high school the following Monday. Walter drafted plans for a community legal resource night. And Luke sat in the back, quietly sipping coffee, listening. Caleb leaned over and whispered, "You know you started this, right?" Luke shook his head. "I just stopped a bad thing. The rest came because people were ready." Caleb watched him for a moment, then said softly, "You don't like being the center of it." Luke smiled. "That's the thing about oaths, son. They're not about being seen. They're about what you do when no one's watching." At the end of the night, as the last person filtered out and the lights dimmed low, Walter brought over a sealed envelope. "No return address," he said. "Just your name." Luke opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, typed, anonymous. "You don't know me. But years ago you saved my brother's convoy when the extraction failed. You never took credit. You disappeared before the medals arrived. But I've followed you ever since. I saw what you did here. And now, I believe in oaths again. One of the silent." Luke folded the letter carefully, held it in his palm, and whispered, just loud enough for Caleb to hear. One voice at a time. The sky over Millstone was quiet that morning. No helicopters, no sirens, no news vans. Just a cool breeze rustling the American flag above the county courthouse, and a soft golden light washing over the steps below, where 2 folding chairs and a modest wooden lectern had been placed for a private recognition ceremony. There were no banners, no marching band, just about 30 people standing or sitting quietly in the courtyard. Veterans, teachers, survivors, youths, old men with medals hidden under their jackets, women with notebooks full of testimonies, farmers, coders, bartenders, and Luke Walker. He didn't want to be there, but he understood why he had to be. Sometimes a man doesn't show up for himself. He shows up, so others can believe again. Assistant Director Lynn Ellison stood at the podium in a dark blue suit, her voice clear and simple. "We gather not to glorify, but to recognize, not to celebrate war, but to honor peace, especially the quiet kind, built by those who ask for no reward." She looked directly at Luke. Luke Walker reminded us that justice does not always roar from a courtroom. Sometimes it steps forward in a bar, in silence, with dignity, and a firm hand between harm and the innocent. A few heads bowed in acknowledgement. Luke sat in the front row next to Caleb, who wore his one good button-down shirt and looked 10 years older than the last time someone called him a child. Ellison continued, "On behalf of the Department of Justice, we present the Guardian's Emblem, a rare civilian honor awarded to individuals who, through action alone, preserved the lives and integrity of others under immediate threat." She stepped forward, held out the box. Luke didn't move. Instead, he stood slowly and said into the quiet air, "I appreciate it, but I'd rather this go to someone else." A few murmurs from the crowd. Ellison raised an eyebrow, to whom Luke looked down at Caleb, then across the courtyard at Dominique and Danielle Hart, and finally back toward the people gathered, most of whom would never speak in front of cameras or hold any title at all. To the ones who stayed, he said. To the ones who watched and whispered and didn't have the strength to speak then, but do now. Give it to them. Ellison nodded and quietly closed the box. The ceremony ended with no anthem, just the wind, the creak of wood, and a few pairs of calloused hands meeting in soft, steady applause. That afternoon inside the Walker's Oath, Caleb sat alone at the corner booth. He was drawing, not coding, not mapping, not tracking networks or infiltration points. He was sketching. A boy in a jacket too big for him standing under a lamplight, holding the hand of a man with tired eyes and a scarred jaw. Two silhouettes walking away from a town that had tried to forget itself. Wasn't meant for publication. It was just, for him, a way to process it all. Across the room, Luke finished installing a new ceiling fan. He stepped down from the ladder, wiped his hands on a towel, and walked over. "You drawing?" Caleb nodded. Luke sat beside him, leaning his back against the booth, arms crossed. "What's the title?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "The Man Who Showed Me What a Man Is." Luke blinked. That one landed like a stone in a still pond. He turned toward his son, not as a teacher, not as a protector, but as a man witnessing the legacy he never asked for. Become real. "I didn't always get it right," Luke said quietly. Caleb looked up. "I didn't need perfect. I needed present." They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Walter called out from behind the bar. "Mail call." He waved a padded envelope in the air. Luke caught it one-handed. It was from Washington. No return name. Just a wax seal stamped with the insignia of a 4-star Marine general. Luke opened it. Inside was a single black and white photograph from 20 years ago, a blurry shot of 6 soldiers, mud-covered and smiling, kneeling behind a Humvee with a tattered American flag in the background. On the back, written in firm handwriting, "You were the last one standing that night. But now, I see you weren't alone. Thank you for raising what the Corps would have been proud to call its own." Rourke. Beneath the photo was a cloth patch, old, faded, and worn, the emblem of the Shadow Arrow Unit, Luke's old division, lost to redacted reports and silent operations. Caleb stared at the patch. "You were really one of them," he whispered. Luke nodded. "Still am, in my own way." Caleb looked down, then whispered, "You didn't just protect them, Dad." Luke turned to him. Caleb's voice cracked just slightly. "You showed me what kind of man I want to be." Luke froze. No headlines, no medals, no internet comment could touch that. He blinked hard, then silently reached across the table and pulled his son into a hug, firm, warm, real. Caleb clung to him, and for a moment neither said anything. But that whisper, so soft, so honest, had done what no viral video could. It rewrote the story. Not just of a town, not just of a trial, but of a boy becoming a man, and of a man finally knowing he'd done something right. Later that night, as the last customer left, and Walter locked the door, Luke stood outside the bar watching the stars emerge. Dominique joined him, hands in her pockets. You ever think she asked that all this? Started over one small decision. Luke nodded. A stranger's voice, a badge on the counter, a boy with a steel ball. She smiled. It's always the small things. Luke looked up at the sign again. The walker's oath. He exhaled, and whispered back as if to himself, as if to the world. Do what's right, even when no one's watching. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, whether you're joining us from a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next one. We share stories that honor quiet courage, everyday heroes, and the power of doing what's right, even when no one's watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the goodness of people.